Christof, you. Are you? I think it is. Good evening. We don't even need the mic. My name is Joe Zimmerman, and I'm the at-large Position 2 council member for the City of Sugar Land. Welcome. It is indeed our pleasure to welcome you to the second of a series of land use forums. This one is actually on attracting employers to Sugar Land. For those of you that had the good fortune to join us for the first forum, we had an extraordinary experience. It talked a lot about demographics and how that impacts land use. Before we get started tonight and I introduce Christof, I'd like to introduce some of our council members that are with us tonight. We have Ms. Bridget Young, who's part of the Land Use Task Force. We've got Mr. Harish Jaju. Harish, I saw you a minute ago. I think I saw Steve Porter. Steve Porter's here. We have our city manager, Alan Bogart. I'd like everybody to welcome them. We also have a number of our boards and commissions here tonight, and I'd like to thank them for coming. Could those that are on, I know the Planning and Zoning Commission, we've got several of the members here. Anybody from our boards and commissions, could you please stand and be recognized? We also have the members of our Land Use Task Force. And would you also please stand and be recognized? It is indeed a pleasure tonight to welcome a couple of gentlemen who are not only two of the premier developers that I've had the pleasure of knowing over the years, but they've been developing in Sugar Land for many, many years. And to be able to have them come and present tonight is really an honor for Sugar Land. I know the mayor shares that also. So Les, Don, thank you and welcome. Many of you know that the comprehensive plan for the city of Sugar Land is one of our guiding documents. As part of the comprehensive plan, there are a number of master plans, one of which is the land use master plan. The task force that we form both on council as well as with a volunteer board is aimed at addressing that land use master plan and actually updating it. I can't, having been involved in the comprehensive plan way back when in the 2000s, I can't imagine there being a more important time right now than updating that land use master plan as Sugar Land now becomes more or less developed, and we now look at areas that are going to need to be redeveloped. So with that, I'm going to introduce Christof Spieler. Christof is the Vice President and Director of Planning at Morris, where he has coordinated a number of public realm improvements, private developments, multimodal mobility projects. It goes on and on. I'm not going to read it to you. So it is my pleasure tonight to introduce Christof. Christof will introduce our guest. Christof?
Thank you very much. As the council member mentioned, this is one of a series of forums. This is number 2 out of 6, really looking at the city of Sugar Land's land use plan. And what we're really focusing on is what's changing, what's different now than it was the last time the land use plan got updated. If you look at the agenda for today, we're going to have a couple of things. First of all, the introduction, which we are in the midst of. Then I will do a presentation on employment types, land use types for employment. Then we're going to have a roundtable discussion with, as the council member mentioned, our developers in Regina. And then we will actually have Q&A, so you will have a chance to ask questions. You should all have question cards you can fill out. We are also taking questions by Twitter, as well as by email. And we'll be collecting the questions up here and passing them on to our panel and our speakers. And after that, and this is really important, we actually have a group activity, a chance for all of you to react to what you hear here tonight. And what we're going to do is we're going to break out into groups in the cane room just down the hall. And so the key is for, at that point in the program, for everybody to get up out of their chairs and gather in groups as quickly as we can, because we want to make sure to hear what you have to say after what you've heard tonight. Last time around in our first forum, we really talked about how the world is changing. We talked about demographic changes that are impacting the United States, this region, and Sugar Land. We talked about shifting preferences. We talked about how the market is changing over time. And we really talked about impacts to land uses. We talked about tax bases. We talked about how we plan. And really what we're doing here is looking forward. I want to start, though, and some of you have seen this already, I want to start by talking about what is land use. It's a very boring word, but in reality, it really affects our everyday lives. Land use is what kind of place you work in. It's what kind of place you live in. It's what options you have for shopping. It's where you can eat lunch. Can you walk to lunch from where you work? Can you get to a park from your house? And even how much you pay in taxes. And I actually stole some slides from Alan Bogart here to really hammer home this point, because this is actually one of the keys to talking about employment and its relationship to the rest of the city. What you have in Sugar Land is actually a tax rate for property tax that has been dropping over time. And we all know the destructive cycle you can get in when a city starts raising tax rates. And when a city is at that point where it has to raise tax rates to keep up with infrastructure, that will actually tend to lower property values. It will tend to keep people from moving there. And then you end up in this horrible spiral of trying to keep raising the tax rates to keep up with a lower tax base. And the real way to balance your city budget is, first of all, to spend your money well, and second of all, to grow your tax base so you don't have to grow your tax rate. If you look at where the city of Sugar Land gets its money from, charges for services are the largest chunk there, but look at property taxes and sales taxes right there. First of all, sales tax comes entirely from commercial land uses. You want your residents shopping in your city, and you want to make sure other cities' residents shop in your city, so you get their tax dollars instead of your neighbor city. And we're going to talk about that a lot in the next forum about retail. But then look at that chunk on property taxes. If you look at different land uses, the amount of property tax paid by different land uses is dramatically different. And what you will find is that basically all commercial land uses pay above average property taxes per acre compared to other land uses, especially single-family homes. And the denser that employment gets, the more jobs you put in per acre, essentially the higher that property tax revenue gets. And so if you look at the overall city budget and look at the city services that are provided to a single-family home in Sugar Land, and then you compare that to the average property tax bill for a single-family home, you will notice there is a very dramatic difference. And essentially what you see here is the commercial land uses within the city balancing the budget and supporting the cost of services for all the residents of the city. The more of these kind of land uses you can get in the city, the better your city budget looks, and the less the pinch on the pocketbook for all the residents of the city. And when we look at those numbers, what we have to think about is that land use is ultimately driven by two things: the private market and city policy. The private market the city cannot directly shape. And a developer will never build something if it does not make economic sense. It doesn't matter how many pretty land use maps we draw. If the land uses don't make sense, they will not be built. The good thing in the city of Sugar Land is Sugar Land is a very desirable place to locate, and that tends to make it easier to make development work. But secondly, city policy. The city does zoning, it does development regulations, does master plans, it provides utilities, it master plans transportation, it provides public facilities, it shapes tax policy, and in some cases even provides incentives to specific developments. And that's what we're here about. What we're looking at in the land use plan is what kind of land uses does the city want, so we can be sure the city can shape its policies around what the goals are. Here are a couple of pictures of Sugar Land from the early 1980s, the point at which there were still empty green fields between Sugar Land and Houston, where you just see the Fluor complex coming out of the ground here and the beginnings of the commercial development of the city of Sugar Land. That is the scale of change we have seen in 30 years. Imagine Sugar Land today, imagine what it was 30 years ago. And our purpose here is to look ahead 30 years. And think about what will the city of Sugar Land be like 30 years from now? What do we want it to be like 30 years from now? So we can shape policies to that. So our specific focus today is on employment. And so what I want to do to set up today is talk a little bit about what kind of employment land uses do we see, and especially focusing on companies. I'll talk less about universities and hospitals and other institutional employers. We need to keep in mind that those two are incredibly critical to a city like Sugar Land, and we're seeing the hospital expansions that are happening now as a real sign of success there. But specifically focusing on the decisions companies make to locate. What kind of choices does a company have? What creates value? What will cause a company to pay a higher rent to be in a better place? What about that equation is changing? And then talk a little bit about the strategy of creating activity centers. And that will then lead us into our roundtable. So, corporate location choices. If you go back historically, there was a time when essentially all business happened downtown. This is downtown Houston in 1912. You can recognize a couple of buildings that are still there. Most of those are now demolished. But at that point, regardless of what kind of business you had, it was probably in a downtown location. What we saw over time was downtown really specializing. And by the 1940s, what you see in this picture, the downtown office tower as a specific building type had really been established. And it still exists today, obviously. What is worth noting about downtown office towers is that they are actually rarely single-tenant buildings. You look at the Empire State Building here. As of 2006, the Empire State Building had 600 different companies in it. So the downtown office market tends to be a very complex one, a few very large companies, as well as a lot of very small companies. And those small companies usually add up to a fairly big share of the market. So part of the nature of these buildings is they are inherently multi-tenant buildings. Downtown in the Houston region, just like in most places, has remained a sort of premier address that if you are a company that's looking for prestige in terms of your location, that tends to lead you towards something like a downtown location. And, in downtown Houston, having a Smith or a Louisiana address still has a meaning to it. There are actually areas that function much like downtown without being a traditional downtown. If you look at Houston, you look at something like Greenway Plaza, or you look at something like Post Oak, they are mixed use like a downtown is. In fact, oftentimes more mixed use than most downtowns are. But they also sort of have these Class A office buildings. They have these buildings that are sort of premier addresses, and also that are often inherently multi-tenant. So that you see a real cluster of office uses working together. So something like Greenway Plaza or something like Post Oak really functions much like a traditional downtown does. Over time, especially after World War II, downtown obviously declined in importance as a type of employment market. And Really what drove that was traffic. That what moved to the suburbs first was residential. And people were stuck on the freeways. There was a time when engineers told us that freeways would eliminate traffic congestion forever. It is very amusing to read 1940s planning literature. And what people found out is they ended up getting stuck in traffic on the way to downtown. And they saw, why isn't my job here instead of 30 minutes down the road at the other end of that traffic jam? And pretty soon, you started to see office buildings spring up along the freeways. Here's Greens Point in the late 1980s, and you see this pattern very clearly, a series of office buildings sprouting along the frontage road. What's really different about this than a downtown? What makes this place different than, say, Greenway Plaza even, is that these buildings are essentially self-contained units. What you have is you have an office building, you have a parking garage, you have that direct driveway to the frontage road, and that's a little unit that can be replicated over and over again, but that are each essentially independent and freestanding. One of the big differences between a typical suburban office building and something like downtown Houston or the Transco Tower is that location is less relevant. Access matters, but address doesn't matter in quite the same way as it does in a more traditional downtown building. However, in terms of quality, there is really no distinction anymore between the suburban office market and the downtown office market. If you look at the quality of finishes, for example, if you're a company that wants a high-end lobby, if you're a company that wants a high-quality building, you can find that all over the place now. And in Sugar Land, obviously, there are quite a few examples of these on different scales. Here's a little shot looking across 59, and you can count how many separate office buildings you see clustered here. So this is already a big part of the employment picture in Sugar Land. The other big post-World War II development was the corporate campus. And really, companies were after two things when they built corporate campuses. This is one of the early ones, Bell Labs in New Jersey, 1962. Companies were after two things. The first was a sense of control. You can imagine in something like this, you are on your own grounds. There's only a single company on those grounds. There's a security guard at the gate. You can control your corporate environment. You can keep your corporate secrets in. You can really control you can provide a sort of quality of life for your employees that's not dependent on your neighbors. So that's number one. And the second is a real idea of a park-like setting. If you grab lunch, you can walk right out of your office, you can sit on a picnic bench, you can overlook the lake. And so just like suburban living in general, the corporate campus has always been about a quality of life. Generally very large tracts. You have to be a very large company to be able to build a corporate campus like this. And there's an inherent inflexibility to it because the appeal of the corporate campus is single tenant. The appeal is that there's only one company under that roof. So if your company shrinks, what do you do with the extra space? If your company grows, where do you put the extra people? And a lot of the companies that have corporate campuses have found those problems. It's amazing how many companies there are that have a corporate campus and then outbuildings scattered around the surroundings where they've put their extra employees. And another key to the corporate campus is amenities. Companies providing workout facilities, companies providing cafeterias, companies providing childcare so that they can really sell an overall lifestyle of being in this place. And so that you're trying to keep people on the campus. You're trying to make sure people don't have to leave to get what they need over the course of a day. Some corporate campuses are office only. Some are offices combined with research. You see quite a few of these in this region. This is Shell off of State Highway 6. All of these corporate campuses have a risk of obsolescence. Here's a win for Sugar Land. This is TI in Stafford, a campus which was built as a manufacturing plant and an R&D campus, and the company's needs shifted towards office space. And so they found themselves with a campus which made sense when they built it, but which no longer met current needs. So once again, there's an inflexibility built into the corporate campus. When it works very well. When it stops working, companies start looking for new space. The corporate campus is definitely not obsolete. This is actually sort of the office building of choice in Silicon Valley. This is Apple and the new campus they're about to build in Cupertino, California. This is actually a result of Apple dramatically outgrowing its existing campus and trying to consolidate all their workers here. And you can see all of the elements of the classic 1960s corporate campus are right here. Even down to they are going to provide their own transit network, Apple-only buses, only for Apple employees, dropping off directly to an underground transit center under the campus. And obviously, Sugar Land has had corporate campuses since the 80s, and I think this is probably going to be a significant part of Sugar Land land use for quite a while. Sugar Land has a lot of the attributes these companies are looking for. And then there's the industrial park, another thing you see in Sugar Land. It's also interesting, if you go back in time, it used to be that light industry, which most industry is light industry. You know, warehousing and light manufacturing takes up an awful lot of space in a region like Houston, all across America. That used to actually be at the edge of downtown. If you went to downtown Houston in 1914, you would have seen railroad lines through the streets where the county courthouse is now. You would have seen warehouses, multi-story buildings gathered all the way around those railroad lines. Those industries left out to the suburbs very quickly for two primary reasons. One was better access. Primarily, we are talking about truck access here. You want to be directly off the freeway. You want those 18-wheelers to get on the road as quickly as possible. But also secondarily, railroad access, which is a key asset for Sugar Land, and also cheaper land. If you have a warehouse, your goal is to spend as little per acre. And frankly, this is probably Sugar Land's greatest handicap in terms of attracting some of these uses is once your land is too valuable, it's actually hard to make some of this pencil out. And the numbers in Stafford may work better than they do in Sugar Land. The variety of businesses you see in an industrial park is pretty dramatic. You see everything from R&D to manufacturing to warehouses, even to office space. And business parks also will tend to have a lot of multi-tenant buildings, which once again is a really good way for new companies to start, for companies to grow, for companies to change. Freight rail access, like I mentioned, is key to a lot of these companies. This is actually an asset that Sugar Land has and not every other place does. For most of the residents of Sugar Land, that UP train blocking the cross streets is not an asset, but for those businesses in the industrial park, it is very definitely an asset. So when we look at all of these types, the question is what creates value? What makes one location better than another? What makes a company pay more rent? The first is quality. And if you're in the office development business, you talk about Class A, Class B, and Class C buildings. What differentiates them? It seems like the quality of the finishes, the quality of the lobby, the elevator service. Short elevator wait times equate to Class A space. The longer you wait for an elevator, the more likely you are to be in a Class B building. It's also the quality of the systems, how good's the air conditioning, how much electrical capacity is there, just all the way around quality. And here you can see the price range in the Houston region between Class A and Class B. That you look at the Class A office space attracts nearly twice the rent that the Class C space does. So quality is a prime consideration. And that's every aspect of the building. You know, when you walk into a building, you can get that sense of quality right away. And it's even the surroundings of the building. What does the parking garage look like? What's the path from your car to the front door? And buildings that are Class A can remain Class A essentially forever. You look at the Houston region and we have buildings built in the 70s and 80s, 30 or 40 years old, that are still attracting some of the highest rents that are possible. So you build a good office building and you maintain that office building. You don't let the finishes get run down, and it can retain those high rents essentially forever. You know, you go to New York City and Rockefeller Center is still a prime address. That's a, 70-year-old building at this point, still commanding high rents. Second thing that creates value is location. If you look at Houston employment, you will see that even though employment is spread out across the region, employment has a real tendency to cluster. We tend to create employment in centers. And what makes some of those centers remarkable? I should point, incidentally, Sugar Land gets its own bright little pixel on this map. So even just on a regional mapping basis, you can already see the success Sugar Land has had in attracting employment. If you look across those areas, the rent for Class A office space varies dramatically. If you look here, you can see once again the highest areas have essentially twice the rent of the lowest. The other thing to note here is, as you might expect in a multi-centric place like Houston, that downtown does not dramatically outstrip the rest of the market. The kind of rents you will pay in uptown are similar to downtown. These are averages, so this isn't the best building in each market. It's the average Class A building in each market. And as usual, rent rates are not always known, so this data is as good as the analysts know it to be, but you get some idea. And once again, you'll notice that Sugar Land isn't at the top, but it is near the top in terms of value. Access is absolutely key. When companies are choosing where to locate, the analysis of how easy is it to get there is usually one of the prime considerations. At their most sophisticated, companies will actually do an analysis of where all of their employees live and then move to a place that's most convenient for most of their people. This is one of those things where you might assume that suburban locations will tend to win, but the nature of where people live and where they work isn't often very closely correlated. So that simply because you're out in the suburbs doesn't mean you're close to all of your employees. For example, you may be in Sugar Land, but if you have employees from Clear Lake and the Woodlands, you have definitely not given them a close commute. So it's not just distance, it's actually the paths of highways and mass transit that make some places easier to get to than others. And that's where something like the Grand Parkway will make a big difference. It's also something where downtown has held its own partially because of the park and ride buses, which make access to downtown by transit easier than any other job center. Location and access, though, is sometimes actually not an analytical thing. It's sometimes emotional, it's sometimes gut feeling. In the 60s, there was actually a great study done of companies that moved out of Manhattan to suburban Connecticut. And they analyzed the factors of how companies chose their location. Number one factor by far, location of the CEO's house, which is actually unsurprising. And so this is one of those cases where if you look at a company, the people who make the location choices are the higher ranking people in the company. These days, it is not Generation Y that is choosing the location. It is the baby boomers that are choosing the location. And that's something where a place like Sugar Land, which actually has high quality residential areas, is actually at an advantage. Amenities are also incredibly important. And when I talk about amenities, I'm talking about things like where can you go to lunch? Is there a park nearby? What does it feel like when you walk out of the building? That on a large corporate campus, a company may be able to provide amenities within the building on the campus, but a smaller company, the better the amenities are in the area, the better off the company is. And that includes business support services. Things like having a good hotel nearby that you aren't afraid to have your clients stay at is a very big deal. And if you're recruiting employees, you're trying to recruit an out-of-town employee, if you have them stay at a place like the Marriott here, they're probably much more likely to get hired than if the only place nearby is, a Red Roof Inn. So all sorts of business support services matter a lot. Industries inherently tend to cluster. If you think of the energy corridor in Houston, for example, it's a series of different oil and chemical companies, and it is also all of the companies that support them. There are two big reasons for this clustering. One is those support services, that if you are an oil company, it is very advantageous to you to have engineering firms who do work for you nearby. It's very advantageous to be able to work with firms that are right next to you. So you're going to get better support services if you cluster. The second is the labor pool. If you are an oil company and you decide that you really like Austin, because Austin is weird, and so you move your headquarters to Austin, you are going to have a hard time attracting good engineers compared to companies in Houston, because those good engineers are already in Houston. They're working at your competitors. So it turns out being close to your competitors is actually a real advantage, because what that tends to do is it tends to draw a labor pool to a given region or a given part of a region. And so counterintuitively, whatever industry you look at, this is downtown Houston right here. Houston, you look at essentially all of the major law firms are not just downtown, but within a couple of blocks of each other downtown. And once again, that really supports the labor pool, and it tends to grow a set of expectations of where an industry is, that companies have come to think of the mark of being a good law firm in Houston is being located downtown. So these clusters, once they create, tend to build themselves. And so something like the energy corridor, when you see a lot of companies moving to one place, it tends to draw even more and draw more and more development. And that really draws that clustering effect you saw earlier. If you were to count the construction cranes in the Houston region right now, you'd really see an effect that there's a couple of places that are seeing a huge amount of growth. And then there's other office markets, think 290, think Greens Point, where you're essentially seeing no new construction at all. So you want to be one of those markets that's gaining critical mass, not one of those markets that's stagnant. So what's changing? I talked about how post-World War II, we saw dramatic change with the creation of the suburbs. What's changing today? One big factor is that the first and second generations of suburban office space are starting to age dramatically. And you can see some really good examples of that if you get on the freeway and drive towards Houston here and look just off the frontage road, somewhere between Beltway 8 and 610. You see in Houston, you see a lot of these older atrium office buildings. You walk in them and they just feel dated. Nobody chose that shade of carpet for anything in 20 years. They tend to have floor-to-floor heights, mechanical systems, electrical systems, which just aren't up to snuff. And what tends to happen over time is the rents go down, and you start seeing the testing centers and other kind of second and third tier tenants move in. And you tend to, and then that tends to sort of create a cycle of decline. So we're seeing a lot of obsolete office space. The second change is how companies are organizing themselves. That office space is getting more and more flexible. If you think back, once again, 50 years ago, most companies were organized around individual offices with doors. Then we moved to rows upon rows of cubicles. And now somebody has decided that cubicles are way too private and personal, and that instead we should just have flexible spaces of all sorts. I've been in the Twitter headquarters in San Francisco where you will see long tables with chairs at them that people are expected to just bring their laptops and pick a seat for the day and camp out there. I don't know what you do with a picture of your family and the cat. I don't know where you put it. I guess that has to be on your Facebook account since it can't be on your desk. And so you're seeing more and more flexibility to office space. This idea of hoteling space, here's a company in Houston that does exactly that. You will see the top managers, the ones who designed the office, they get their own offices, but everybody else just gets a seat at a long table. So that the idea of this hoteling, where you don't even get assigned a desk, you simply pick a desk for the day, and when you get assigned to a different project, you'll pick a desk next to the people you're working with that day. And what that's leading to is actually a dramatic contraction in the average floor space per person, which has a very real effect on buildings, because imagine what that does to your parking garage. If you had a garage that made sense for 1985 office densities and you've just doubled the number of people. So this is actually something that's tending to make some buildings obsolete just based on parking requirements and number of elevators. This is not a universal trend. In fact, you will see quite a few oil firms and Houston engineering firms that have realized that engineers work better if they aren't interrupted. And the productivity gain of giving an engineer an office with a door, more than makes up for the cost of providing that office. So you will sometimes see these trends going in diverging directions, but the average is towards denser space. We're also seeing a real breakdown in the separation between work and leisure time, which tends to always come at the expense of leisure time, so that companies are really pitching work as a sort of lifestyle. You go to Silicon Valley and you will see the best examples of this, where you see the Google campus, which is basically designed to feel half like an office building and half like a kindergarten. Literally, there's the slide. I wonder if anyone ever actually uses this slide, but you know for sure that that's a stop on every tour every prospective employee gets. You can see the company brand sort of taking over the space so that you identify with the brand you feel like you are part of. That you see conference rooms looking less and less like conference rooms. You see flexible space. Hey, today I want to just hang out in the lounge and work. Informal meeting areas. And more, companies going back to having the cafeteria on campus. Their idea is if they feed you 3 meals a day, you will work 14 hours a day, which is really the basic goal. I went to the Twitter recruiting website, and they have a series of tweets from people talking about how great it is to work there, and they're bragging about, meeting Grammy-winning artists, the free company Yoga. They're talking about how cool it is to live in downtown San Francisco, but amazingly, they're bragging about how long the hours are, which I don't know that you'd recruit me with that kind of thing, but you can see that's really, I think, a big cultural change that you're especially seeing in the .com companies. Another big change is downtown is getting more attractive again as an employment location. This is a sample of companies from around the United States that have moved from the suburbs back into downtown. You can see a lot of the Fortune 500 moving in that direction. Amusingly enough, Continental moved to downtown Houston and then merged with United, which was in the process of moving to downtown Chicago. So there's that trend twice. A lot of that has to do with the generational preference changes we heard about last time. That as people want to live closer to downtown, it actually tends to draw companies closer to downtown. And it's also about ambiance. Just like in the 60s, the corporate campuses were basically selling, you can work in a place that feels like a park. They're saying you can work in a place that feels urban. 2 key drivers there, and you see both of them in this aerial shot of Boeing headquarters in Chicago. One is downtown urban neighborhoods revitalizing, increase in density in inner neighborhoods, and just the general gentrification. And the second is transit access, which as preferences shift towards transit, it tends to make downtown locations look more attractive. Those suburban locations that have that kind of housing and interesting neighborhoods and that have good transit can likewise benefit from this. An example in Houston is that Chevron has been steadily consolidating its employees downtown. Exxon may be moving to the suburban office park model, but Chevron's actually been moving employees from places like Bel Air and the Energy Corridor into downtown Houston and is planning a new building to house those employees. And another change, which we are literally in the midst of, is the creation of mixed-use centers for employment. That is obviously nothing new. Here is a mixed-use activity center in Sugar Land. But it's also nothing new to have industries cluster. The Texas Medical Center is a really good example of that. And that was sort of a deliberate planned clustering. What is really new is developers creating mixed-use places that are planned from the beginning as mixed-use locations. So that from the beginning include employment, include hotels, include retail, include residential, all clustered together, which once again, we're in the middle of one of those right now. And you see this all over the United States. You see it all over the Houston region. You can see it happening in the Woodlands. You can see it happening in Sugar Land. You can see it happening in City Center off of I-10. Trying to sort of replicate the amenities and the ambiance of downtown. You know, one of the great things about Town Square is you can walk across the street to Starbucks, which in your typical suburban office building, you cannot do that. You have to get in your car to get to Starbucks. And even corporate campuses, this is the front door of the ExxonMobil campus, are joining mixed-use centers, which is another trend you see in Sugar Land, where you look at TI, for example. So that brings us to an overall strategy, because how do you create an activity center like that? It's private developers, but it's also public policy. One is mixed uses. What's the purpose of mixing uses? You tend to make all of the uses more valuable. So look at it two ways. That office space is more valuable because it has a restaurant that you can walk to for lunch. That restaurant is more valuable because it has a captive group of customers next door who will keep it busy at lunch, and then they can get the residents for dinner. So if you do this right, the uses add value to all of the other uses. Second of all, industry clusters. This is one of those things that's much easier talked about than done. This is London bragging about the Silicon Roundabout. The list of places that have tried to become Silicon Valley is incredibly long. And this is something that a lot of times is somewhat accidental, and there are limits to what public policy can do, but the more industries cluster, the more value you create, because new companies want to be next to those companies, and they will start paying higher rents to be there. You want to integrate residential, seems to be another really big pattern here, and this goes back to what we talked about generations earlier, that if companies are trying to recruit new college graduates, being able to say, you're going to be able to get a really nice apartment next door to work, is actually a real plus. Believe it or not, people at some point in their lives actually want to live right next to work. Later they learn that that might not be as advantageous, but initially it seems like really great. Walkability. The idea of being able to walk out the front door of an office building and actually go somewhere, go for a short walk at lunch, get your coffee, get your lunch, is something that's increasingly appealing. So creating a good walkable environment, which is not an easy thing to do, but very important to make this work. Multimodal access. Mentioned transit earlier. One of the really interesting things when you look across the United States, you look at places like San Francisco, you look at places like Dallas, is the degree to which transit can support centers like this. This is Mockingbird Station up in Dallas. What you see here is a park and ride lot on one side of the station, but on the other side of the station you will see jobs, you will see residential, you will see retail, you will see a movie theater. This is more valuable as an employment location because you are giving the employees a choice of both. They have good freeway access and great parking. So if you want to drive to work, it's got everything any place could offer, but it also offers another option of transit. And so multimodal access can really add value to these centers if it's done correctly. And there's a lot of ways to do this wrong. Optimized parking. This is beautiful math. If you look at when a restaurant fills parking spaces and compare that to when an office building fills parking spaces, if you compare an office building to a performing arts center, you will notice their maximum parking demand is different times of the day. You add that together and you have to build fewer parking spaces. And guess what? Parking spaces are not cheap. And so you can make the economics of a project look a lot better if you can get away with building fewer spaces. And at this point, most suburban office development is actually building structured parking. We're already at the point of paying for garages. So if we can use those more effectively, that is a big benefit. And mixing uses together tends to optimize the parking if the parking is shared between the uses. And that goes down to key management. Public space. This is one of those things that's a lot harder to quantify, but generally speaking, we've known for a long time that parks tend to add value to surrounding land uses if those parks are well managed, if those parks are successful, if those parks are safe, if those parks have events in them. And that public space also serves a second function of really building community, as you see in Sugar Land, where the plaza in front of City Hall becomes the gathering space for the major events in the city. If you look at all of those pieces, just about everything I've touched on is driven in one way or another by city policy. For example, parking regulations. You can't optimize that parking if the city has rules that won't let you do that. So questions of zoning, questions of development regulations, public-private partnerships, economic development, and political support all become key in can your city build places like these? Because it's not an easy thing to do. It's not something that will necessarily happen by itself. And that really brings us to our panel discussion. The question is, how do you actually make successful employment centers? And the reason we have pulled together this panel today, and I'll give them a chance to actually introduce their own histories, is to actually do a case study of what we have here. So Les Newton from Planned Community Developers has been developing Sugarland since 1984. This guy knows more about this city than nearly anyone here. Don Janssen, also working with him at Planned Community Development. Huge part of developing First Colony and also an incredible history in Sugarland. And Regina, whose job description it is to bring more companies to Sugarland. So we get to hear both from the public and the private side and what it takes to make this happen. So I'll let our panelists take their seats. I think Regina is really enjoying getting to sit on that side of the table today.
We are too.
We all are.
You've all been on this side quite a few times.
Many times.
And they told me I could have the gavel, so.
Oh, nice. So if you think my questions are too obnoxious, you can just gavel me.
That's it.
Okay, so let's start with Les and Don. Tell us a little bit about your history developing in Sugarland. Not everyone knows your company, so tell us a little bit about what you've done.
Well, I actually came here, I was in middle school, and it was kind of a live-work project. I've been here 33, I'm just totally kidding. But I did come in 1980, and so my focus was to kind of converse with brokers in the community and in Houston to try to connect the land that we owned in Houston to the needs of people in Sugarland to the needs of people in Houston. And so I was to establish contacts with those people, introduce them to Sugarland, tell them about the attributes of a small community and the potential that it had. And so I've worked on just about every type of project. And when you look at a city, I mean, from selling sites to churches, which was a huge emphasis of ours when we started, to schools, office, healthcare, multifamily, everything you can think of, I've been involved in some kind of a land sale. So it's been exciting to see it grow.
Yeah, we've been developing First Colony for over 30 years. Yeah, it started with the residential, like most suburban, and from the very beginning, it was all about live, work, and play and quality. And we were fortunate to have a direction from the Heinz organization that design was very important, quality of materials, landscaping was always emphasized, and we always wanted to have everything you needed in a community when we were developing First Colony. It all ended with Town Square and the culmination of the mixed use, but really the whole thing has been directed toward creating a total community, and employment has always been an important part of the process.
You might mention some of the projects you've both worked on here in Sugarland.
You want me to start with the daycare centers? Now, gosh, that's interesting to talk about that.
We sold the land to Fleur in the early 80s.
1982. I just come in 1982.
Most of the retail on Highway 59 we developed. Essentially, our company has done everything except construct houses and apartments. We've sold those houses, or sold those lots. We developed the lots. We developed the recreation centers, the amenities, the parks, and then we did the industrial park, the business park, which had manufacturing and office warehouse. Don, leased and sold most of those sites. And then a lot of office and retail, several million square feet of retail. We were a joint venture with Heinz on the mall. So we've been very fortunate. We've been able to do all this in one location and live 10 minutes from home, or 10 minutes from work.
So Regina, tell us a little bit about the role you play at the City of Sugar Land.
Well, the primary role that I have is to create new wealth for the city, new capital investment, and primary jobs, because primary jobs drives future retail sales and supports the services here. And we do that in a multitude of ways, everything from marketing the community, direct sales to companies and recruiting them here. We work with the existing business to retain them. It's important that they not only move here, but they stay here and that they expand and grow. And then we also oversee special projects. The amenities that you kept referring to, things like the minor league ballpark, Constellation Field, and the upcoming Performing Arts Center.
So what does the city do to attract employers? What kind of tools do you have in your toolbox when you're talking to a company that might relocate here?
Well, first of all, the quality of the community. That's the first selling point. There's opportunities here, not only from a corporate location perspective, the types of offices, the quality of office, and the industrial parks that we have, the living options that are here in the city, providing a variety of those for companies wanting to relocate here and having a place for their employees to live. And also, it's the workforce that we have. We have a phenomenally highly educated workforce. So a company wanting to move here and looking for a certain talent know that they've got a great pool of future employees to draw from. And then it's just this great all-around community. Having those amenities such as the parks and the entertainment and the restaurants that support the company's activities, and I shouldn't leave out healthcare. That has been a huge driver as well in some of the corporate decisions that have been made because it's all here.
So you're informing companies about Sugar Land, you're helping them find space in Sugar Land.
Right. And we're also, when necessary, utilizing tools such as incentives to close the deal. It's not something we start out doing, but if it's necessary in order for Sugar Land to compete against other communities, because corporations nowadays they're looking nationwide, and so they're looking at a community that matches and aligns with their corporate criteria. But there are times that there are many great communities out there, and when we're competing, we utilize different types of tools, such as incentives, to help us close the deal and relocate them here.
Can I add something to that? There are cities that offer incentives, and there are cities that promote what they have for companies. But I can just tell you, because I am the first person that usually gets a contact from a company, that Sugar Land is recognized as being a proactive city that actually wants to make a deal. There's a difference in putting that out to say we want to attract companies. Sugar Land really does have a track record of being very progressive, very win-win with companies. And that's, for us as developers, that's as important to us as it is just to be able to develop a nice building.
Yeah, so you feel more comfortable developing buildings because you think that it's a more choice location and the city will actually do things that will attract companies here and fill your space.
Well, it's absolutely a partnership. And I can feel confident that when I call Regina with a deal that nobody knows about and we talk about it, we come together and talk about a package that's going to be better than our competition. I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but for this point, the city definitely uses what they have in a way that is good for the company, for the city, and for pretty much everybody that's involved. It's just a win-win scenario.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Whenever we talk about incentives to companies, I think that can give people the wrong impression. And as a former accountant, I'm really proud of our city that every time we've done a deal it is a win-win. There's always an economic positive. It's like you're getting those incremental revenues and then you're foregoing a little bit of that incremental revenue. But in every deal we've ever been involved with, the company or the developer has to take risk. Our incentives are based on performance, and that performance is measured by incremental revenues to the city. So it's really very enjoyable to work with a city that's smart like that and able to, watch the bottom line.
And I assume in the end you never want to be in a bidding war with a different city. What you want is a company that wants to be here for the quality that Sugar Land offers.
Yes, and also it has to make sense for the community. There has to be a greater benefit to the city, and it's kind of to their point of it has to be win-win. There has to be a return on that investment. So we do a tremendous amount of impact modeling prior to putting together those incentive package to ensure that it's a win for the company, but more importantly, it's a win for the community.
Okay, I want to get into a specific case study. So Minute Maid, just across the street here, moved here in 2009. They were actually in the Galleria area, so in a very, very nice office location there. So what did the city of Sugar Land do to help attract Minute Maid?
Well, first of all, I'm going to start with the developer. This was actually an RFP. Minute Maid had made a decision to no longer be a landowner, and they began a regional search in the Houston region for the prime location. And so our developer partner put in a proposal, and stop me if I misstate anything here, to see if this is something that they would be interested in. And we made a short list.
They started with 420 buildings. So I went, oh, okay, great.
Right,
Perfect.
exactly. So I think it's when we were narrowed down to 8 or 4 is when they came out to the community. So whereas I'd love to take the credit for this, it started with our development partner and attracting them with a great proposal and getting their attention and moving them out there. And then from there, as Don said, we began to work together to look at how we could make this work with Minute Maid and the relocation here. And the city was very proactive in going to Minute Maid headquarters at their current location with the elected leadership and meeting with them and telling them how important it was for them to move out to Sugar Land. This was important to the entire community. So it was definitely a team effort throughout the whole process.
Well, it was interesting. One of the comments that was made, I don't know in which meeting, but it's the big fish in the little pond versus the little fish in the big pond. And it really resonated with Mike St. John because he'd been the little fish in the big pond their entire corporate life in the city of Houston. And out here, they're the prominent company. And so, that means a lot to somebody and to a major firm.
So what else was Minute Maid looking for? What were their criteria when they were looking at locations?
You want me to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Well, they first of all started, and you kind of did your slideshow, so you helped me out a lot with what we're going to say. But it is true, they wanted to be close to their employment base. 25% of their employees lived in Fort Bend County, so close to their employees. It was interesting, too, because we talk about quality of life. That's what they were looking for. They said, yeah, we want a nice, pretty building, but if it doesn't have all the amenities, if it doesn't have everything to support our employees and to create really that quality of life, whether it's living here, working here, playing here, enjoying it. They're really concerned about their employee and satisfying their employees' needs. They wanted it to be a safe environment because where they were was in Houston and the neighborhood was changing a little bit, and so they were seeking a safer environment. And it was interesting. It wasn't the first thing they said, but it was occupancy cost. And so they were in a 30-year-old building, and they were looking at aging building systems. They were looking at systems, the air conditioning. It wasn't zoned like ours are. So they wanted a new, fresh environment, and that meant being more energy efficient. So I think those are the 4 key items they were looking for.
They're one of the companies that they had a cafeteria, they had a lot of facilities, and they looked at that from an efficiency standpoint and said, if we've got all these restaurants that our employees can walk to, we can eliminate that cost. So there's other cost factors when companies do consider these mixed-use environments, they're looking at those restaurants and saying that's great for us because it eliminates the need for us to subsidize a cafeteria.
Well, and for their employees. I mean, what you can hire an employee for in Sugar Land is drastically different than when you can hire in the Galleria. I mean, for us, commute time, they're closer to their families. So, I mean, from an operating cost standpoint, like Les said, not only how many square feet they had to lease to accommodate the needs of that, they could eliminate the cafeteria and the staffing, but just the cost of each employee. So, that was one of the not so small items that they put on their list.
Did things like having a hotel across the street, was that a positive factor?
Only the fact that they sold Pepsi in that was a problem for them. I don't know why it was a problem. And it wasn't funny. The first thing you want to do is you meet with Coca-Cola and Minute Maid is to kid about Pepsi. You do not kid about Pepsi.
Okay, but just it was corrected.
Yes, it was. Well, they agreed to
clarify.
put that, yeah, because the Marriott actually, to their credit, they had a corporate account with Pepsi and those products, and they now put Coca-Cola in those meetings. Very wise decision. But that was very important to them. The meeting space, the conference center, which was, when we built this project, one of the major goals was providing the conference center to attract Fortune 500 companies, and it definitely had the attention of Minute Maid that could see themselves having national events there.
And so once again, they didn't have to provide that space internally, they could share it with other companies.
Correct.
So how much, when you're designing something like Sugar Land Town Square, how much does the overall quality of space, the level of finishes, the landscaping, and so forth matter in terms of attracting companies?
Well, it's obviously very, very important. It's been important for every aspect of the First Colony development. We've, again, paid a whole lot of attention to landscape design, to the quality of materials and the quality of architecture in all the buildings. Whenever we've built something, whether it's a gas station or a car wash or a recreation center, we've tried to make it better than anyone we've ever seen before. With Town Square, when we started this, there were no examples in the Houston region. There were no examples in Texas. We went to Reston, Virginia, and the entire planning staff and city council took planning trips with us to see what it was that we were trying to create. And the materials were very important, that the design was timeless, that it was quality, that, this is something that should look the same 100 years from now. And so we think that, or we know that employers look at that and they say, okay, well, this is a quality environment, not just for my employees, but for my customers and any other visitors that I may have, that this is a place that they'll appreciate coming to. It'll be a positive experience when they come to this office. So I think the environment is very, very important. And I think it's becoming more important to employers.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if it ties in with this a little bit, but of the 60-some companies, office companies that we have here that office in Town Square, 40 of those are corporate headquarters. And they're from 1,000 square feet up to 50,000 up to 2. Those are people that are not making short-term decisions. They don't just jump around when they can get a lower lease rate up the freeway. They're making a commitment to put their business there and grow their business there. And I think that having the quality, and we were able to sell the quality to say, we could have done it a different way, and you can see other office buildings on the freeway that have done that. And people notice that. They really do.
And we've had thus far, now Town Square's been here for 10 years, and some of our 5, 7, and 10-year office leases have come up for renewal. We have 100% retention in our office leases. Everybody wants to stay.
And expand many of those.
And meanwhile, let me interrupt here to note, if anybody has questions, we're going to be giving you the chance to ask questions shortly. So put questions on these cards and pass them up, and you can ask questions of our panelists too. And we'll also be checking our Twitter account and checking email and seeing what questions we get. So let's talk about some of the other recent companies that have moved here to Sugar Land, like Texas Instruments, Fluor. What drove their decisions?
Well, first of all, for Texas Instruments, it was relocating or staying within the community where the majority of their employees were based. While they had realized that their existing site had become obsolete, they also knew that they needed to retain key leadership that they had, as well as find a location that would attract new and fresh talent. One of the things that they had shared with us, in fact, when we'd had dinner with them, was that they were having a difficult time bringing new college grads to that existing campus in Stafford and encouraging them to join their team. And so having that fresh location, more high-tech, and in more of a corporate office environment than what they had at their current campus was critical and key to that, as well as being able to deliver the site and the project within a timeline that they had defined to meet their needs. And so with that, we were very fortunate that Plain Community Developers became their developer for that site that's going to occur. As it pertains to Floor, that again is a retention project, but for us, it actually started out as what we thought was a recruitment project. For 3 years, we worked with, and we didn't realize it was Floor's real estate group out of California because they called it Project E. We sent information on different sites in Sugar Land. It was an annual, every 6 months. We were updating the information, our planning processes, our timelines, the availability of land. And it wasn't until year 4 that the confidentiality agreement came across, and we had executed it and found out it was actually an existing employer within Sugar Land. I was grateful that we had been very proactive and aggressive and attending to them.
Responsive,
And responsive to that. So there again for Floor, it was relocating to an area that was still in close proximity to their employees, because retention of employees has become very critical, as well as being in a community that attracts great new talent as well. And so I think that's some of the things that sets Sugar Land apart, is it appeals to so many different generations.
Talking about that, are you seeing a shift in how generations work? We've heard about Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z. Are you seeing shifts in what companies are looking for as their employee base is changing?
Absolutely, especially as it pertains to millennials. Is that what we're calling them now? We heard for years that companies loved being out here, and you were right. The majority of them previously made the decision based on where the CEO or the president lived. They needed to be close proximity. But what they were realizing is that those younger employees didn't always follow them to their location. So they wanted to ensure that the new generation had the amenities in the community that they had identified as important to their lifestyle. And so you see the city now kind of addressing those, and we'll learn more through this land use forum where we need to continue to grow those. But entertainment was probably the most important thing that we heard from so many of the different corporations as far as their workforce was concerned. They needed to have a place that not only great environment to work, but someplace to go in the evenings, on the weekends, for entertainment. The young professionals put a lot of value in that, and so that was one of the things that we heard quite a bit about. And great park system and the ability to have walkable environments, and we're also kind of high on their list.
And they like free entertainment.
Free, yes, always.
So that's why all the events in the plaza are very appealing to me.
So what places is Sugar Land usually competing against? Or what places is Town Square competing against to attract companies?
Well, from an office perspective, it's really Energy Corridor, West Chase, and the Galleria. Well, let me back up. Close end, if you're saying Class A office, it's really the 2 Granite Towers and 3 Sugar Creek, which is the building up on the left. Because there's only 3 Class A buildings, truly Class A in Sugar Land. But when you get outside of Sugar Land, it's really the Galleria. It's really where you can commute 30 minutes, because that's what employers look for. That's an acceptable commute time. So we're excited from a competition standpoint to be able to attract a lot of the Katy growth, with all the planned communities that are growing there. When 99 is finished, it's going to reduce the commute. It's going to cut the commute in half just to get to Cinco Ranch from here. And a lot of those companies are now choosing to be on I-10.
For other types of uses, such as our light industrial, logistics, and R&D type facilities, we're also competing with the Woodlands. Clear Lake has a business employment center. And then in the state, we've had some competition with, of course, some communities in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, such as Irving or Frisco, Plano, and then some in the Austin area. So those are typically, when we're competing with other communities in the state, those are the areas that we're typically up against.
So what are those places offering that's compelling? Well, what's making the sell for Sugar Land hard?
Oh, hard?
Lack of space would be
Yeah,
one.
exactly. I was going to say the availability of space right now is our biggest challenge. If they're looking for large contiguous space, either whether it's a Class A office or even within our industrial park, we have a shortage of supply at the moment. Our occupancies are well above the region's averages, so that's the current biggest challenge.
Well, and I would say housing for the new the new millennialists and the XYZ, whatever. And so it's having the kind of housing that they want, because here we are selling live, work, play, but they don't want to live here. So it's harder to get them to work when they don't want to live here. So I think that's a challenge going forward that we've seen the Woodlands. I mean, you look at City Center, they've kind of embraced that, and we did a competition amongst I'm on the real estate council for Texas A&M as far as, and it's all these young, bright kids that want to make a lot of money. And so we got this panel together, and there were 6 that were Woodlands, 6 that were City Centers, 6 that were Town Square, and 6 that were Friend Face, average age 30. And so we created this company, and we were first, but then we got dropped to second because we didn't have the mixed-use, high-density housing. So we were second to the Woodlands only for that reason. So that told me, and we actually worked with the city on making those presentations and analyzing and making the proposal, so it's very telling.
I know when Sugar Land Town Square was built, this was fairly unusual. Are you seeing a general trend to places like this?
Yeah, it's like when we started, there was no city center. The Woodlands hadn't really done their mixed use, yet. The places in Frisco and all those didn't exist. South Lake was just starting, so it's now very definitely a trend. We've gotten a lot of calls from small towns across Texas and the United States that want one of these. And the first question we ask is, okay, well, how big are you? Well, we've got 10,000 people. And we say, okay, well, call us later. I mean, everybody, I guess when you guys go to municipal league meetings and, they come here and they see what Town Square is about, everybody wants this. But it is very, very difficult to do. We couldn't have done it without a partnership with the city. We couldn't have done it without a very patient ownership that held the very, very best piece of land in the whole 10,000 acres to the very, very end. So it's just it's hard for people to do that. But I do think you're going to continue to see more and more of these. And there's always different versions. We're very sensitive about the fact that a lot of people call themselves a town center, but this is a real town center. This is a real downtown. We've got government, we've got business, we've got retail, we've got people living here. So it's it's hard to recreate one that has everything.
And if I could add to that, we have had visitors throughout the state, and this really has become the standard for creating a town center. So we've from communities all over Texas and recently Alpharetta, Georgia, they are constantly coming here to learn kind of the best practices. What do you feel was successful? What would you do differently? In fact, we have a canned presentation. We do it so often. So we really expect these to continue to kind of proliferate throughout the state.
Well, and the other thing that's kind of key in real estate, if you build something and lease it, you'd like to sell it and make a profit. And so what's happened is that now where mixed use was really not very well understood by the capital markets, now it's kind of moving up the list as being something they really want. So there's a lot more dollars chasing mixed use environments. There's more equity available to build them. So.
And I think that's a very important point that we'll hear more of as we get into some of our other forms like redevelopment. When you're thinking about this, you have to think about the developer's business model and how developers actually make money, because if you don't think about that, it's not going to work.
Yeah, we try to.
We appreciate that.
Occasionally.
Okay, a question from Twitter. Are high-rises a possibility for Sugar Land? Do you see our skyline getting any taller here?
I don't know how to answer
Define,
that.
well, first define a high,
High
yeah,
rise, yeah.
Yeah, what's a
yes, I
high
think
rise?
buildings will get taller. I think they should get taller. I don't know that you'll see a 50-story building, but I think we could very easily see a 20-story building.
Hey, if a 50-story can go to Midland, Texas, you can certainly put it in Sugar Land.
Hadn't been built yet.
That's right. Well, but I think that it just, you have to, just because land prices are going up, you have less and less land, and, you know, I see other developers out here like Peter and others. I mean, you don't have a choice. I mean, if you're going to pay this much for land, I mean, you've got to increase the density. So I think it's by default. I think you'll see that.
So actually, we just got another question, which is along the exact same lines. If our supply of land is low and Sugar Land does not have a whole lot of greenfield left, and the demand is high, what's the best solution? Is it going more vertical? Is it redeveloping? Is it annexing?
We're already looking at potential sites for redevelopment because we know that the problem in Sugar Land with redevelopment is we don't really have any real good distress yet. And it takes
And we're hoping we never do, Wes.
that's the problem.
That's the goal.
It's even our oldest retail centers, they kind of go to the next generation of tenants, but there's an owner behind that that's making a cash flow, and they're satisfied with that cash flow. So it becomes very difficult to buy an old strip center, for example, and say, well, there's an area where we could really improve upon, one, build a better product, bring in some more office, some mixed use, do more efficient parking, bring structured parking, do the shared parking like we did. I was glad Christof mentioned that. I mean, this is the very first time we all learned about shared parking together through the Urban Land Institute when we went through the creation of the PD for Town Square. But when we see these redevelopment sites, they're still, I mean, to buy something that is making money and tear it down makes it a very, very high cost of land. So we're going to get to that tipping point where it makes sense. I'm not smart enough to know when it is, but I feel certain, you know, much lesser places in the region have hit that historically, and it's happened. So I know it will happen in Sugar Land. There will be redevelopment, and the density of that redevelopment should be higher than what's there today.
Well, what's interesting, when you build, you build based on demographics and the needs of the community. I mean, remember when we did the survey and the number one demand need was a Chili's. So I think that has changed a little bit. But the point is the demographics at Williams Trace and 59 is significantly different today than it was when we built that shopping center. So I think you're going to see, and you had your chart that showed office rates, how they eventually they get to a point where they can support new development.
And the audience is being really great at passing up follow-up questions.
Okay.
Is Town Center landlocked, or if there's demand for more expansion of Sugar Land Town Square, is it possible that you could see some of the older, less dense development immediately adjacent start to redevelop?
Don says yes, I say no. We have this argument all the time.
That's why it's a 50-50 partnership. You know, somebody's going to win this argument. But I think it's all driven by capital markets, what they want their yields to be, what the rents are. So he's right, they are high priced. I'm right that the time is coming. So
let's see. Oh, this is a really good one. As a developer, have you made any mistakes? And what have you learned?
Les
You mean
wants to
today
take this
or
one.
this
Yeah.
this week? Or, yes, we've made lots of mistakes. We can't help but, we drive around and we've lived in the community, had some involvement in most of what was built in First Colony, and there's things that we approved architecturally that we wish we hadn't. There are things in hindsight, when you get to this point, you go back and wish that you'd been a little bit more stingy with the land. You had paid attention to density, but it's really hard when you have 10,000 acres that you're supposed to be developing and selling, it's hard to see this far into the future. So, yes, we make mistakes almost every day. We just try to learn from them. You made any?
I'd say 1,400 lots on the ground all by
Yeah, in
themselves.
1985 when I came,
The market kind of does certain things.
we had
to you, too.
1,400. We had 1,400 finished lots on the ground at the end of '84, and we sold 54 lots in 1985. We would never do that again. You have to, and we weren't paying it. We back then nobody was doing market research or paying attention to whether jobs were being created in the market, and so we've certainly learned a lot about paying attention to demand. And it is interesting how it's changed. When we were doing primarily residential development, the important thing was the schools, and people were coming to here for schools. And as Don said, then it's like, when are we going to get the mall? When are we going to get the restaurants? And now it's the employers, and it's all of us wanting, when are we going to get to the next level of retail? Why can't we get that store to come out here? Sugar Land has money, the household income's very high, and so we're always, and those are things that we're trying to understand why certain restaurants go out of business and others don't. There was a time in our careers where we said we would never lease to a restaurant because it was just so risky, and now we've got this with 32 restaurants out here. So I guess we learned never to say never.
Well, and I think, let me just add, I think sometimes you look at a mistake and we look at it to say, how can we do that better? Because you did what was needed at the time, which was that was the demand at the time. But you can look at it today, and with all we know, with what we've done with the city, when we did Town Square, we didn't have zoning for this. We created the zoning for this. But it was to capture what was going to be a very huge become a huge advantage for the city based on density. So I think those mistakes are leading us to be smarter in the future as to what we can do and bring to the city.
Couple specific questions here. If our business, I talked about business parks and land values in business parks. We have actually more land in Sugar Land west of the airport zone for business use. Does that make sense in terms of current land values? Do you see that need? Do you see the companies that are looking for that space?
Yes, we turn away more business now than we have the opportunity to site here. So with the Sugarland Business Park essentially built out, there's a couple of very small spaces. We receive requests all the time. Companies want to locate in Sugarland. Unfortunately, you have to have a site, especially for a business park that's going to have some office and then distribution and R&D in it. But you have to have a shovel-ready site. And also with the business park being located next door to the airport, it's adjacent to the Sugar Land Regional Airport, as well as on one side being rail-served, the highest and best use for that site is a business park.
Well, two huge drivers, too, that I think we can capitalize. I-69 with the Panama Canal being widened and then the intermodal that's being developed. Those are going to be huge generators of containers, whether it's onto rail or onto a truck. And to be this close, we would be the closest business, other than rural, I guess, closest business park setting that they could actually utilize. So.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned office space there, and you mentioned the airport. Is that implying that the companies that are likely to locate here are more likely those that have their headquarters in the same building as some of their distribution operations or have more office space there as opposed to a pure distribution operation that's managed from a high-rise somewhere?
That's a good question. I think you'll see a combination. You'll see some that are just purely distribution, but you'll see some that want to locate their offices with their, whether it's distribution or research and development in the same building.
Well, yeah, and the trend in industrial, it's gone from an average of 10% office to warehouse distribution, whatever it is increased to 30%. So more and more companies are choosing to put more office close to their distribution centers.
And then attracting employees becomes more and more critical, and
Correct.
the same amenities that benefit office buildings start to benefit that as well.
Correct.
Right.
All of you, what are your thoughts on the present Fleur campus? What do you see as the right kind of sort of future use of that?
I don't think you're going to see 65 acres of parking in the future. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to create more density there, and you can actually do it in a park-like setting. I mean, that's a great example of capitalizing on an incredible location in real estate, like you said. It's location, and that's just an incredible location. So,
And I think the Fleur is an example of a building that's approaching obsolescence. Fleur, when they built that building, engineers used drafting tables. They have very huge floor plates, wide corridors. They have the full complement of cafeteria and all that. And I think that, they're a company that experienced the up and down in terms of employee expansion and contraction, and they found that it's almost impossible for them to lease any of that space in a multi-tenant way to another tenant. To sublease that to backfill space while they're in a down cycle. So I think their future plan is going to involve buildings that are multi-tenant in nature, that are configured, like a typical 25,000 square foot floor plate as opposed to their 50,000 square foot floor plates. As far as their existing facility, it is too valuable not to be redeveloped. Either that building will be reconfigured. I'm not smart enough to know whether that building gets torn down and a new building is built, or whether I tend to think that there's still good bone structure in that building. Probably the glass systems are near obsolete. It would basically be a gut and redo, unless the owner just finds somebody who happens to just need that type of building, which, as you pointed out in your presentation, there's still companies that want the big floor plates and the big, corporate campuses. So it's just it's not always a good real estate investment, but a lot of these companies choose not to own their real estate. Fleur does not own that building. So they made a smart decision to sell and lease back that building, and now it's somebody else's problem to deal with.
well, and I tell you the beauty of, the beauty of Lake Point is Fleur has found themselves in a live, work, play community. They didn't start out that way, but when we developed Lake Point, it's all connected to the amenities with the bridge, the hotel. And so now that site is perfectly located in what every company, especially corporate headquarters, want, which is a live, work, play environment.
So based on the current market trends of these multi-tenant facilities, they're going to have to go in and redevelop it. But currently, the market supports that. The private market is supporting that. I'm going to use UniCal. I still call it the UniCal building. It's now the United Healthcare building. The new owners have come in and have gutted a lot of the areas of that. It was built almost a year or two before Fleur was constructed. But the market is supporting the level of investment that's occurring. So they basically transformed the interior lobbies from what was the early 80s carpet and dark paneling to, now it's chrome and replacing the glass and the marble finishes. I think, and they've also had huge floor plates on each of those, the floors, the 10 floors that they have, and so they've come in and reconfigured those so that they could segregate and sublease it to many tenants. I would expect the Fleur building to go through the same process.
So if you look just across the overall Houston region office market, we know not all of those older buildings are going to redevelop. So what can the city of Sugar Land do in terms of city policy to encourage those buildings that are within Sugar Land to redevelop, to upgrade, to remain first-tier buildings rather than decline and simply go to low rents and low operating, and sort of, I think one of the points we heard in some of our roundtables we did for this project is the idea that sometimes a property that's just a little bit run down can actually be quite profitable for a landlord. So what can the city do to discourage that and try to keep these older properties up in quality?
Well, one thing that we have throughout First Colony, we have deed restrictions. And, we have a homeowners association that looks at buildings and in perpetuity will make sure that they're maintained a certain way. Now, that's not the inside, certainly the exterior. As far as the buildings themselves.
I think at some point it may make sense. I think it did make sense with the, I'm sorry, it's called the United Way?
United Healthcare.
United Health, well, I need to get out of town square.
Sugar Creek on the lake.
What's going on. It does make, there will be a time where there's a win-win situation created between an owner of one of those buildings and the city to say, okay, if we can just get a little bit of help on the taxes for a period of time during redevelopment, then we'll come back in with this very large investment and elevate the value, create incremental taxes, and it'll work. At some point, it'll work.
And that's using some of the tools that the city has, and I'm going to call it our toolbox, whether it's creating future tax increment reinvestment zones on what we'd identify as a redevelopment area that allows us to pour some of the future incremental taxes that would be born from the improvements back into the project. And so we would definitely look at that, as well as providing tax abatements for new improvements as well. So we would look at everything that's available to us to help the developer or the building owner to bring it back to what we're going to call a Class A status.
We're also right in the midst of a tremendous transition in our office market. In 2013, Don leased more office space in Town Square than we've ever leased in a single year. And we quickly moved up past 95% occupancy. Well, what happens when we hit 95% occupancy is we don't want to be ever 100% full because that means we're not charging enough. So,
Wait a minute, are there any tenants in here
Oh,
of ours? Before you make this, go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
but when we compare you look at all the activity that's happening on the energy corridor and what we've focused in on, and Donna's already mentioned the expansion of Grand Parkway as a key element for Sugar Land, the rental structure in the Grand Parkway, and a lot of this is just, the oil companies frankly are just going out and paying too much to get a building on the ground, but what's the differential right now in rent?
$8,
$8 a square foot
including expenses.
on, say, a base of $22. That's that's a very, very, very significant 35% higher rents in Katy in the energy corridor versus what our average is in Sugar Land. So rents are going to start going up in Sugar Land. In response to that, we're going to draw some of those companies are going to come down because they're going to see that cost differential. But as our rents come up, it's going to make the redevelopment of some of these buildings more viable.
Okay, a last question, and I asked this one. This actually came in from Twitter, and I ask it because it's a natural lead-in to what we're about to ask everybody out here to do. If you have a first contact with a new company that's considering Sugar Land and knows very little about Sugar Land, what would be your description of the city to a company considering locating here?
Oh, gosh.
Well, I would say a lot of it's personal experience. I've lived here 33 years. I've raised a family here. My kids, when they left, they went to Baylor. And when they decided where they were going to live, once the one had a family with my two grandchildren, praise God, she chose Sugar Land. And so they made the decision themselves that they grew up here, and when they had an opportunity to choose after they had children, which is important, that they chose Sugar Land. And there's so many testimonials from people that, I mean, we're developers and we're the city, and so we're selling all the time. But when you can take people like the Mike St. John's of the world, you take people that have had companies here, and you listen to their testimonials, that speaks volumes. That says a lot more than, I mean, there's dollars and cents and there's buildings and all that. But when you really look at the people that have been here for years and their businesses have grown, they've flourished, and their employees live here, to me, that's our best sales tool. But
Well, I guess this is like my 60-second elevator pitch. And we do this when we do business recruitment missions throughout the U.S. Basically, when I'm trying to describe to someone, whether it's on the East or the West Coast, and help them get a feel for what Sugar Land is, helping them understand that we are part of a metropolitan area, that the community, though, is deep in history, being a company town where our namesake was Imperial Sugar, but it was built on visions of that leadership created years ago, back from the 1900s to today. And it's rare to find a community that has kind of that single vision that drives it from its original inception to where it is today. We were also blessed with master plan developers, such as Hines, Sugar Land Properties, and now Plan Community Developers, who enhanced the vision of the original vision and helped us to grow into a quality community that not only provides an excellent lifestyle for the residents who live here, with all the amenities that are available, from great schools to parks, to entertainment opportunities, but also a corporate environment that, surprisingly, 14 Fortune 500 companies have a significant presence here if it's not their corporate headquarters. That's a huge statement to make for a community that, while our population's about 85,000, has a trade area of over 600,000. And so that begins to help formulate kind of a description of what we are.
I think it's quality of place, it's quality of people. You have a place where a company feels like they're wanted, and that's a big thing when you're selling. I mean, Minute Maid felt like we really, really wanted them, and that's why they came.
Well, and from a global perspective, we have this is a small point, but I saw a graph. We have one of the lowest standards from the standpoint of cost of living to move employees of anywhere in the country. So if you're somebody looking around to say, where do I want to go? I mean, we're a great option for someone that's moving from California, say.
Or
Just
New
say,
York,
just
Maybe you're in New York.
Jersey.
Right.
Okay, please give our panel a hand. And I will apologize to everyone whose question I did not ask. This is the pile of questions we did ask right here, and this is the equally large pile of questions we didn't get to. But what we wanted to make sure is that we have enough time for our group activity. So what I want everyone to do now is get up out of your seats, walk out into the lobby. You will find some refreshments out there. Grab your refreshments and head to the